Good morning from Israel. Thank you, Ahmed. I believe that many of you have celebrated the Labor Day, May Day earlier this week. Here in Israel, we're celebrating today our Israel Independence Day. In another couple of hours, I'll be joining my family at a big community picnic. And if I have to leave a little bit early, I promise that I will see the recordings later on. I made a slight change in the title here, as you can see. I'm not talking about partnerships only between cultivated meat and meat companies, but also with food companies. And I think the reality is in the last couple of years, and in particular, that the food industry in much more broadly has taken a great interest in cultivated meat. When I say cultivated meat, I will always be indicating cultivated meat and fish, but for the purposes of keeping it brief, cultivated meat. I want to use this platform to initiate a discussion among peers, if you will. I have a hard time calling our industry an industry. We're too young, too new. There's nothing really commercialized in significant size and proportion, but still we're facing many opportunities and threats, challenges, solutions concerning a number of interdependent, what we might call critical success factors. The sources I'm using are all in the public domain, so basically what I'm sharing with you are my interpretations, my thoughts about what we're all reading almost on a daily basis. Last year, 2021, all of us were discussing with great intensity the David Humbert report and the Joe Fassler study article that followed that. And I think we took those indications that came from Humbert very seriously. We believe that this discussion, this debate in effect, is good for our industry, and that we need to focus on the technological and economic assessments of us from outside and take a realistic approach from inside. There's still many open questions for all of us to learn and to solve, and problems or challenges to solve. Within the business challenges ahead, I believe that we should try to narrow them down, communicating the difference between incremental and transformational innovations. I think there's a lot of confusion on this topic, and therefore I'm making an effort to mention it, that we need to create a kind of positive mix between investors and strategic partners, both for the capital impact that we need, as well as for the partnerships in different countries abroad. We need to overcome, of course, the regulatory obstacles, which are always number one on our list in each of the different countries. I'm adding something that I haven't read enough about, in my opinion, which is to leverage the public and private partnership, emphasizing the role of government in promoting and supporting cultivated meat. And then, of course, to implement a renewable energy program, which here too, we will need a lot of government intervention, and add another dimension to the discussion, which is mergers and acquisitions. And I'll go into that in detail. I have largely been involved most of my business life. Wait a second, I'm jumped one slide too many and I don't want to miss it. Here we go. I've been largely involved most of my career in what we would call incremental innovation. In my case, having to do with extracting and optimizing everything that comes out of the soybean. Incremental innovation, as I think all of us know, is how we improve existing systems. It doesn't address main issues, which are the systems themselves. And here, I believe that we have to address the fact that the global food system is not suitable for feeding the world population today and in the next decades. And therefore, we have to focus in on a different kind of innovation, transformational. In this case, that's the point of differentiation between the plant-based protein alternatives and the cell culture protein alternatives. Transformational innovation is what we're going to need, what we need in order to meet the risk of global food security today. And that, in my opinion, and I think the most of us who are attending a conference of this sort, is the role of cell agriculture and cultivated meat. The biggest challenges for transformational innovation are in scale. I believe Yuki addressed that question earlier in the recorded session. And here, all of us together need to take a lead and focus on how we're going to scale up from an economic CapEx, OpEx point of view, and up to and through all of our go-to-market strategies. In distinguishing between incremental and transformational changes or innovation, I want to refer to this International Panel of Experts report, which was on sustainable food systems, which was published last month. Because I believe both their conclusions and their recommendations are very important for all of us. We need to figure a way to realign innovation pathways with the public good in mind and for the public good. That's all on the subjects of the renewable energies and carbon emissions, how we're producing our food products, the differences between from one region of our planet to another, developing whole food systems. And so this is the primary questions which I think we need to raise in terms of sustainable food systems, all aspects of sustainability, and realigning our innovation pathways for all of us. In Aleph Farms, we've been working on this. I would say that there's some debate internally and externally on this subject, because what we're trying to do is many things simultaneously. When we talk about transformational change, it's not possible to just prioritize and approach this sequentially. The food ecosystems that we're trying to build incorporate many different foundations, from prioritizing the environmental conservation, including resources in an efficient circular manner and minimizing the waste and moving towards carbon neutrality. From a socio-cultural point of view, how we support growers and collaborate with local communities, preventing inequalities in our food systems, and they exist everywhere. How we promote human health and nutrition, and of course, ensure the economic viability of our project. In this effort, we're approaching investors and strategic partners. And when I saw this IPS slide last month, of course, the first thing I did was looking for where Aleph Farms is, here in the right corner. And what amazed me most is how we're all overlapping at this early stage of our business lives, how we're touching one another. This was not planned from above, how all these different companies are investing in all of us, taking active roles or capital investment roles, and encouraging this industry to succeed. This raises many questions about the upsides and downsides of such partnerships with the food and meat industry. It's important for us to work with companies that have strong and well-known food and meat manufacturing brands as partners and not as adversaries. This is a point of differentiation between us and, let's say, the plant-based, who are kind of gone to war with the meat industries. On the other hand, and we want to be able to collaborate in order to afford customers a safe, tasty, nutritional, and affordable products. The downsides, of course, are that many of these heritage companies, without mentioning any names, of course, carry a lot of negative baggage, from the animal welfare to contaminations to their unilateral dominance of the food sector. And so we have to figure a way how to create a proper balance, both benefiting from these companies' impact upon us, in the industries, but also how to differentiate ourselves. I think that we are all very impressed with ourselves, with the rapid growth of investments in cultivated meat and fish, and how ag-food tech investments have taken an active interest in us. But when we look at the numbers from this Ag Funder report from 2020 that came out last month for reporting on 2021, we see that if we position ourselves in the upstream investments, yes, they've increased dramatically in the last year, but the largest part of the investments in the last year have been in downstream, in restaurants and retail and online restaurants and meal kits, e-grocery, and so on and so forth. So in spite of this rapid growth, we are not really the top focus, the high level focus of the investment community. And yet we all know how much money we still need to raise in order to achieve our commercial goals. And you can see it here in this slide from Ag Funder. Almost 50%, even in the last 2 years, has been to restaurants and e-commerce or e-grocery, whereas the innovation deals for categories such as cultivated meat is a relatively small percentage, even if the absolute numbers look very high. The next point, of course, has to do with the regulatory. There's differences between the regulatory pathways being taken in the United States in the dialogues that some of us are having with FDA and Department of Agriculture, which seem to be very positive, and we are looking forward to all of us many of us to be able to achieve regulatory approvals in the next year or two, or the rather uniform but problematic regulatory pathways taking place in Europe through the Novel Food Act. In Asia, and Sandhya mentioned the APAC SCA and the discussions that we're having about harmonization of regulatory pathways in Asia, but that's not happening yet. This is still discussions, and we have a lot of questions ahead how we're going to do that. I believe that the recent statements in China on a government level will impact very much the regulatory pathways that we're able to take in China, which thereafter will impact as well in the rest of the APAC countries. But there's still a lot of work to do, and not only work, but to see what the, who will come first, second, third, fourth, and so on and so forth, because that's going to impact our strategic plan. The next point is the public and private partnership. What we saw before is a lot of private partnerships between investment, VCs, equity funds of one kind or another, or strategic partners and from the meat and food industries. But the fact is, in other emerging industries, government has taken a very profound role. We've seen how Elon Musk and his different companies in the last decade has raised $5 billion from the American government alone. And then we've seen how national governments over decades have supported the meat industries in Latin America and the United States and Europe. So the question is for us how we get governments, local municipal governments as well as national governments, to take a proactive role. But in the case of cultivated meat, I think it's not only government support, but how we're going to use this transformational innovation approach to impact also these partnerships so that they're actually the funding. And I recommend to you this book by Sir Ronald Cohen on impact investing, because I think that shows how the Netherlands government has joined and how the Israeli government has joined in recent months, and how this has to take place in other countries as well. But when I look at it more carefully, and this is a recent report from the Good Food Institute, and we see how the Israeli Innovation Authority has made a very strong commitment in the last few years to sell agriculture and cultivated meat. even at a higher level than other countries like Netherlands, Singapore, and the United States. Still, when I start to do the calculations, the total investment in cultivated meat in Israel is maybe 5% of all that we've succeeded in raising in the last years. And so while I'm very proud and pleased with how the Israeli government is taking a proactive role, I think that it has to be bigger. And that raises the question, what about the rest of Asia and each of our countries, and how we're going to involve government in what we're trying to do? On the question of renewable energy and the carbon market, it's been discussed, and I'm sure others will be discussing it. These are part of our negotiating points with the government agencies and with local municipalities for incentives and so on. How we're going to utilize local hydropower, wind turbines, biomass, geothermal, waste to energy to achieve our net zero goals, and to guarantee that we're part of this transformational change, not only when it comes to the cultivated meat itself, but how we're actually operating our facilities and impacting society. Transformational innovation also means supplying our global food supply. And here, it's no longer a secret, the Aleph farm strategy. We don't intend to build the largest meat factory in the world in Israel and start to supply by ship and by air our product to all over the globally. Through a very different kind of spoke and hub and spoke strategy, we hope to reach out globally together with our strategic partners and to build local and think global. My last point is a point which I haven't seen discussed. I've seen it discussed with other industries. We've seen a decade of ag tech merger and acquisitions. For those of you who follow these, you know the fledgling companies, startups, and how they gradually have merged and become bigger companies. And as they became bigger companies, how they merged with more larger industries. And here, I want to take maybe a personal approach or personal note on this. In 2017, I had the privilege as part of a microalgae startup to be involved in the formation of the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, the EIT Food, which was is part of the Horizon Europe plan. And this brought together many food and manufacturing brands, from Nestle and PepsiCo on one side to technology companies like Siemens, and then many, many SMEs and startups. And at one of the opening meetings before EIT was actually announced, we heard a lecture from Frank Lehman, who was then the VP of Global Head of Open Innovation and Venturing at Nestle. And his focus at the time was in intellectual assets. And he raised the question of why EIT Food. And he gave the personal or company experience of Nestle, who had been involved in decades of internal growth, internal new product development and new technology developments. And if we're talking about transformational change, they realized, and I think we all realized, that it won't be enough to do it from inside only, and that these kinds of partnerships are a critical part of being able to make these kinds of transformational changes. And so I see that the next stage between us will be the role of partnerships, mergers and acquisitions among our companies. It's in the vested interest of the governments, the impact investors, the heritage food companies, the regulators, to guarantee the future of cultivated meat. This is our statement to everyone. This is our mission. I think it's our responsibility to manage our business futures, to know our own strengths and our own weaknesses, to focus on the opportunities and the threats, to address the challenges, and to bring about the solutions better sooner than later. So I thank you, and I welcome any questions. And I think I need to stop sharing.